March. March on campus that year was beautiful. The weather was oddly but consistently warm enough for the flowers to bloom early in the month. The world turned green one day, and suddenly everyone wanted to be outside, enjoying the warm weather. The porch space heaters were put away, and the windows were opened to let in the cool night air. The sorority sisters ate meals and studied outside to make the most of the good weather. Lizbeth's mood remained wintry.
She was focused on so many different things: her thesis, the Paris trip for spring break, graduation, graduate school. She used it all as an excuse to avoid finding Wil and talking to him.
She spent most of her time in the sorority house study room or the library,
typing away on her laptop and doing research. "Okay, so big news," Kitty said at a Sunday officers' meeting. "We won the lottery?" Marie asked.
"No, the guys at Alpha Pi said Wil and Charlie have been showing up to stuff again.
And we'll be at the dinner tomorrow."
Every year, the brothers of the fraternity and sisters of Phi Alpha Pi had an annual end-of-year dinner together.
It was probably the only formal event the fraternity had. The sisters did all the work to plan it, but they were far more accustomed to planning these types of events. They did it this way to make sure outgoing seniors and officers were celebrated. It was held at the sorority house, and Jane and Kitty had been busy decorating the dining room to make sure it looked classy. They had been meeting with a couple of the fraternity brothers to plan the event. "How did that come up?" Marie asked, when neither Lizbeth nor Jane said anything. "Oh, I asked if they had seen them. Charlie was fun to have around, and Wil was his own source of entertainment." Lizbeth watched Marie roll her eyes. "We won't be making fun of Wil," Lizbeth said. "He doesn't deserve our derision." Her sisters gave her odd looks, but Lizbeth didn't offer any other information. She had decided not to tell them Lydia's story. Lizbeth spent the day before the Phi Alpha Pi dinner trying on different dresses. "I've never seen you put this much effort into anything related to clothes," Jane said, as Lizbeth tried on a fourth dress. "I'm the current president, a graduating senior, and want to look pretty. Also, Wil Darcy will be there, and you're anxious about seeing him for the first time since New York." Lizbeth rolled her eyes and changed into a fifth dress. She eventually settled on a simple navy dress. Since Lizbeth wasn't responsible for anything at the dinner, she was looking forward to simply enjoying herself. Marie and Kitty had taken charge and were working very well together. They were a good team, and Lizbeth felt confident that she was leaving the chapter in good hands. "Lizbeth in a dress!"
Kitty said when Lizbeth and Jane came into the dining room.
"Wil Darcy, look out! This isn't for him." "Bullshit!" Marie yelled from across the room. She was rearranging furniture, trying to squeeze a few more seats into each table to accommodate the large group. Lizbeth could feel a blush spread across her face, so she fussed over little details on a table in an attempt to get rid of her nervous energy. "You may not have spent all semester ranting about him like you did in the fall, but we all know you're completely into him," Kitty said with a smile. "How are you so calm?" Lizbeth asked Jane. "I told you, I'm over Charlie." "I think that's bullshit, too." "Caroline's already here," Jane said. "I'm sure she's working to keep both men away from us." Lizbeth was shocked at Jane's attitude. She didn't know how to react to this version of Jane. The dinner was predictable. It was a ceremony that had gone unchanged for generations.
They honored the seniors, and gifts were given to those graduating and to officers.
Lizbeth gave each of the officers a bangle bracelet with the sorority's Greek letters on it. The sorority members gave all the officers official sorority pens and business card holders. The seniors were given regalia to wear at graduation. The entire sisterhood had worked together on a quilt for Lizbeth. It was made up of squares of different T-shirts from the sorority. Lizbeth knew something like this was coming. There were usually extra T-shirts in storage after events. Lizbeth recognized a few from memorable events from the past 4 years. In the center, the sorority's Greek letters had been embroidered onto the quilt. Lizbeth knew Jane had probably done the bulk of that work. Even though Lizbeth was not responsible for anything at the event, she was still at the center of things. She noticed Wil and Charlie arrive with other fraternity brothers, but she wasn't sitting anywhere near them. Caroline was at the same table as her brother, and as Jane had suggested, seemed to be keeping the men away from Lizbeth and Jane. It didn't work with Charlie. Later, Lizbeth wondered how easily distracted Charlie really was. His behavior at the dinner reminded Lizbeth of what he was like at the museum. He got up and wandered from table to table, seeming to get distracted by someone he knew at each one. The next thing Lizbeth knew, dinner was over, and Charlie was sitting next to Jane. "Hi," he said, as if he had only seen her yesterday. "Hello," Jane said, blushing a bit. Jane didn't give Charlie an opening, and Lizbeth watched out of the corner of her eye as Charlie debated what to say next. "Can we talk?"
Charlie said, after a few moments in uncomfortable silence. "Okay,"
Jane said with a sigh, but followed Charlie as he got up from the table and went outside to the back porch. Lizbeth looked back at Caroline. Wil was standing behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder, restraining her. Wil nodded at Lizbeth, and she realized that, whatever objection he had once had to Jane, he had dropped it. Jane sent Lizbeth a text message about an hour later. "Won't be back tonight," was all it said. Lizbeth and Jane shared a hotel room in Paris. Traveling with the French majors was more fun than they had expected. They were surprised when Caroline decided, nearly at the last minute, to join them on the trip. According to rumor in the group, she had paid early, but backed out and never gotten her money back. When Caroline changed her mind again, she was allowed to come,
only if she took care of her plane ticket, passport, and remaining fees. Caroline, as odd man out, was left to stay in her own room, and often left without a buddy.
Sometimes she tried to talk with Lizbeth and Jane, who did their best to ignore her. Lizbeth wanted to remain focused on their trip. Jane was so happy and in love that Lizbeth found it hard not to think about Wil and be a bit jealous of her best friend. "Charlie said he wants to take me to London someday,"
Jane said one afternoon, as they sat outside the Louvre having a snack of waffles.
"You'll love London. Statues everywhere."
"There are statues everywhere here, too."
"And you keep stopping to look at each one,"
Lizbeth said. "They're fascinating. I'm taking pictures of the plaques,
so I can look them up on Wikipedia when we get back to the hotel."
They were 2 days into their 5-day trip.
Lizbeth was returning to Boston for a quick trip home before returning to school after spring break. She wanted to see Charlotte, who was reluctant to share details about what was going on with the Collins family. Lizbeth hoped Charlotte would be more forthcoming face to face. Lizbeth just wanted to understand what Mrs. C had been thinking.
What she wasn't admitting was that she hoped to tempt fate. Maybe Wil would be visiting his aunt.
"Charlie also thinks I'd love skiing in Colorado," Jane said.
"Is that where he is this week?" "Yes, but I told him I've never skied. He said he thinks I'd be a natural. I told him I don't even ice skate." "Well, you never had a chance in New Orleans. I think, especially if he teaches you, you'll love it all." Lizbeth watched Jane blush and smile. Any bitterness Jane had harbored after Halloween had slid off her like water. The only anger that remained was directed at Caroline. "Wil told him everything that had happened," Jane had told Lizbeth their first night in Paris. This was their first moment of privacy since the sorority fraternity dinner. Jane had spent nearly all her time with Charlie, even overnights. "About Caroline's role too?" Lizbeth asked. "Well, that Caroline had played her own role. Wil said he assumed Caroline had spoken to me about needing to back off. It turns out she told a lot of lies and ruined a cell phone." "What?" Lizbeth said. "She dropped Charlie's phone in the toilet and broke his SIM card. He had to get a new phone, but was so busy with classes that Caroline offered to take care of it. She was supposed to get my number, but she told him I didn't want to have it added back into his phone. Charlie thought you didn't want to talk to him. They convinced him that I wasn't as interested as he was. He didn't want to be the pushy guy who couldn't take no for an answer. Wow, how appropriate of him. I feel bad for not telling him how you were when I saw him. He said it confused him, but that when he saw you at the museum, you seemed different. He was afraid he and Caroline had invaded something intimate. Obviously, Caroline has a thing for Wil, but Charlie said that Wil never encouraged or discouraged anything. He simply allowed Caroline to drag him along because it wasn't worth the fight. That puts our first meeting into a new context, Lizbeth said. I have to wonder, to be fair to Wil, if she poisoned the well for you a bit. She clearly knew she had lost her chance to you well before you knew what was going on. She clearly doesn't know Wil as well as she thinks she does. She mentioned Jorge in front of Ginny over the break. Even Becca knew that Caroline had done something wrong, but Caroline didn't seem to realize it. Be careful of her, Lizbeth. This isn't over. I think she came on this trip to try to get back at you somehow, Jane said. Lizbeth and Jane led the group through their modern art walking tour of Marais. Caroline, even though she had designed the tour with them, refused to participate. They took a snack detour in the Jewish quarter, where most of them gravitated toward Lizbeth's suggestion of challah and pastries. Lizbeth, having Jewish grandparents, explained some Hebrew translations. Centre Pompidou was the final stop on this tour. Ladies, you did a great job, one of the organizers said when they got to the museum. Caroline, Lizbeth, and Jane, your picks were perfect. The blend of modern art with the historical context was very interesting. The group applauded the team before they all went up the escalator and into the museum. Jane and Lizbeth joined a few people to look at a collection of photographs by Constantin Brancusi. When Lizbeth saw his photograph of a rooster in the workshop, she wished Wil was with her to enjoy it. Caroline spent the time sitting, looking bored, and waiting for the rest of the group. She had done this often through the trip. She showed no interest in the art, the historic places, or the great food around them. The only time she seemed engaged and interested was when it was time to shop. Lizbeth oscillated between pity and annoyance. Lizbeth couldn't imagine that Wil would ever enjoy traveling with Caroline. I'm so excited that we are on our own for dinner tonight, Jane said as they left the museum and went back to the hotel. My dad gave me the name of the restaurant his mentor, Frank, owns. He said they are expecting us tonight. Just you and me? Well, if others want to join us, I'm sure they can accommodate us, but I think you and I are eating on the house. Bring money just in case. Nobody else wanted to join them, even though the restaurant had 3 Michelin stars. Lizbeth suspected it was an issue of cost. She didn't want to promise a free meal that she couldn't deliver. Lizbeth remembered Frank from when he had come to help after Jack's New York City burnout. Frank had helped Jack push through his depression and then later
build the restaurant in Boston.
He greeted Jane and Lizbeth with hugs and ushered them back to the chef's table. Last time you ate at a chef's table was your grandfather's restaurant on Christmas Eve, and Wil was with you, right? Jane said, after they had been settled with a glass of wine. Yes. Did your grandfather scare Wil? Lizbeth thought of her grandfather, Abe. He was one of the most respected chefs in the world, the child of French-Jewish immigrants, a Holocaust survivor, a man who was famous for his temper above everything else, and who had high expectations for the people around him. Had he scared Wil? No, everyone was amused when Wil and I ordered the same exact meal. I refused to change my choice when he ordered the same dessert I had. Are we getting the same meals? Jane asked. Well, here we get chef's choice. He will make us whatever he damn well pleases. We'll eat it, enjoy it, and ask for more. Good thing neither of us has any allergies. Good thing neither of us is vegetarian. They would kick us out. The chef, his sous chef, and the maitre d' kept bringing them sample plates to try. Jack had clearly explained why Lizbeth and Jane were in Paris, so as each plate came, they chatted with everyone about what they had seen and enjoyed. They were on the 4th plate when the maitre d' came over without food.
There is another young woman who says she is here with you. Should I bring her back?
Lizbeth and Jane looked at each other and then towards the door. Caroline was standing there looking around the restaurant. Lizbeth was surprised to see awe on Caroline's face. When Caroline saw them, she waved and rushed over. Lizbeth didn't have a chance to say no before Caroline sat down. Wow! How did you manage to get the chef's table in the back? Did you sleep with someone, Lizbeth? Caroline said once she was sitting. Nope. My father arranged this for us. Your father, the cook. My father, the chef. Caroline looked confused, but said nothing. Did Wil not tell you who my father is? Lizbeth asked Caroline. No, Caroline said. Lizbeth was tempted to explain everything to Caroline, but decided not to unless she asked. Instead, Caroline looked around the table at the food still sitting there and held up her glass waiting for wine to be poured. She remained silent while she picked at the food on the table and drank her wine.
When she did speak, she did so in poor French.
The conversation with the staff had been friendly, but now it was uncomfortable. Lizbeth and Jane translated some of the things said, except when the staff mocked Caroline in a way only the French can. Why did you decide to join us? Lizbeth asked Caroline as they ate. Well, everyone went out on their own, and I was alone. I remembered you told the group we could come. I didn't realize we would have such an intimate meal in the kitchen. I thought you had just picked a place your father had suggested. I thought this was your first trip here, Lizbeth. I don't recall ever saying that. I have extended family in the area, and my father trained here for a few years when he first became a chef. We really don't do touristy things when we visit. This is my first trip on my own as an adult. It's been an exciting change. Ah, I thought you were working in the library to earn the money for the trip. Yes, because I wanted to pay for it myself. Caroline looked at Lizbeth as though she had suddenly grown another eye in the middle of her forehead. Caroline fell silent, wheels clearly turning in her head. Lizbeth left dinner with a new understanding of Caroline. She was all show with very little interest in the world around her. It was late when they left the restaurant and got back to the hotel. The chef had been gracious enough to cover the cost of the food and drinks. Jane insisted on leaving a tip even though everyone assured her it wasn't necessary. She prattled on about how everyone had gone above and beyond to make them happy and deserved it. Caroline tried to get them to have drinks with her, but both Jane and Lizbeth were exhausted and had drunk quite a bit at dinner. I don't think Caroline has ever had to work for anything, Jane said through drunken giggles in her bed that night. She certainly is very good at presenting herself as something she isn't. Jane, the drunker of the two, was texting Charlie from her bed. Lizbeth walked around the room getting ready for bed.
The television was set to MTV and playing popular French music videos. Their room had a balcony looking out over the Avenue du Général Leclerc, and they could hear the noise from the street. Charlie wants to know if he should ask Wil to tell Caroline who your dad is.
Lizbeth thought about it as she brushed her teeth. Tell him not to bother, Lizbeth said. The rest of the trip was just as amazing as the first part. On their last day, they made a few small stops on their way to the airport. Lizbeth was exhausted and ready for a few days with her family before going back to school.
She had to get back to finishing her thesis, picking which grad school she would attend,
dealing with Phi Alpha Pi elections, and maybe not thinking about Wil so much. Their last stop was Saint-Sulpice Church. Lizbeth, tired of churches, wandered over to Pierre Hermé's bakery for macarons. The bakery had put out chairs and tables on the sidewalk. She ordered a drink and some macarons to take outside. Before going outside to eat her snack,
she ordered boxes of cookies to take home to her mother and Becca.
She sat outside, enjoying the solitude and fantasizing about having Wil right there with her, sharing the moment. Her reverie was ruined when Caroline sat down in the other chair. Are you dating Wil? Lizbeth took a moment to adjust to the shock of Caroline's question. Excuse me? Hello to you as well, Caroline. Would you like a macaron? No, I don't want a fucking cookie. Are you dating Wil? Lizbeth looked at Caroline and took a deep breath. Why are you under the impression that I am? I know what I saw between the two of you over Christmas break. He's been absent from the townhouse a lot this semester. He's clearly keeping a secret, and I am sure you're at the heart of it. Why is it any of your business who Wil dates? Why? It's my job to keep women like you from getting your hands on men like Wil. You're nothing, and you only want to secure a rich husband. Wil needs a certain type of woman. He needs a woman who can move in certain circles. Having spent all year with you, I know of no reason why Wil would want to be with you. I can't imagine what you said or did that would make him think so highly of you. Correct the information I've been given and tell me you're not dating him. Let me just make sure I'm clear. You think I am only interested in Wil's money? You don't think that I might enjoy spending time with him, have interesting conversations with him, share common interests with him, or make him happy? You don't think he would consider a woman outside his own socio-economic group, no matter how well they get along? Obviously, you come from a totally different world than he does, so you can't really have anything in common at all. I, on the other hand, know him and know his world. He doesn't tolerate money-hungry women. Again, just trying to understand. You're the ideal woman for him, even though you clearly have no interest in art, culture, politics, or food. You don't just want him for his money and status? You believe he finds you interesting and engaging. You think that your own wealth makes your own motives pure? I've known him for years, Lizbeth. I know him better than you do. He and I have an understanding. Well, if this is true, then you have nothing to worry about. If Wil is truly the man you think he is, then he wouldn't want a woman like me. Thus, we can't be dating. Just tell me if you are or not. But by your own logic, it can't be true. Wil is too smart to fall for a woman like me if your understanding is correct. Lizbeth, stop being a pain in my ass. Are you dating Wil? No. Promise me you won't. Why the fuck would I make that promise? Promise me. I will not in any way ever promise not to date Wil. Caroline looked confused. Is that a promise? She asked. Figure it out for yourself, and please leave me alone. These are my last few hours in my favorite city, and I want to enjoy them to the fullest. Caroline sat there and stared at Lizbeth for a few moments before getting up in a huff and leaving the table. Lizbeth sat there alone until Jane made her way over. What was that about? Jane asked. What? Caroline. She thinks I'm dating Wil. Really? Who told her that? I have no idea, but I had some fun with it. Fun? I know why she changed her mind about coming to Paris. Lizbeth and Jane parted ways at the airport. Jane was heading to New Orleans and Lizbeth to Boston. They hugged goodbye after they checked their bags and got boarding passes. Can I ask you something? Lizbeth asked before they parted. Sure. It's just something that Caroline said to me earlier. Oh, yes. I think you're in love with Wil, that he's perfect for you, and I'm sad that you two haven't been able to figure that out. No, I know all that, and I love you for not rubbing my face in it. You were with Charlie at the townhouse before we left for Paris. Was Wil there? Why? What did Caroline say? She said he's never around. She thinks we're sneaking around secretly dating. Well, he didn't come home until late on the nights I was there. He had his books with him, so I assumed he was studying somewhere on his own. Charlie and I weren't paying much attention.
Charlie did mention that he hasn't seen Wil much this semester. Something kept Wil away most weekends.
I guess, if Caroline thinks you're dating him, that it would be a logical explanation. Do you want me to ask Charlie? He is picking me up at the airport. No, I don't want to distract you from kisses. I'm sure it's nothing. It's not like it's true. I hope not, because if you have been sneaking around getting laid on weekends, then we have bigger issues. Lizbeth ignored this. "Have fun with Charlie and bring me back some beads," Lizbeth said, before hugging Jane and heading toward her gate. Lizbeth was exhausted by the time she got into Boston. She crawled into bed as soon as she got home and slept for 12 hours. She woke up to the smell of bacon and found her father in the kitchen making brunch with Josh, who was also home for spring break. "What are your plans?"
Jack asked Lizbeth.
"Gardner, I'm going to spend the night. Do you mind?"
"Nope. I'm sure you want to go for a ride and see Charlotte. Beware of Catherine, though. I finally shut her down by saying I was concerned about conflicts of interest."
"What conflicts?"
"The way you and Will acted over the break, it seemed like positive changes were happening. I felt your relationship with him didn't need the pressure of his aunt being invested in our restaurant."
"Did you mention Will and me to her specifically?"
"I did," she pressed.
Lizbeth drove out to Gardner and promptly went to Charlotte's. She had dinner plans with her grandparents, but wanted to have some time with her friend. She was excited to find some changes to the cottage. More of Charlotte was present in the house decor. Colin greeted her at the door with a hug. Lizbeth let him prattle about his amazing internship with Mr. Berg and the business plan they were developing for him.
"The idea is that people of limited means should be able to enjoy an evening out with a fancy car to get them around. I'd have a fleet of high-end luxury cars and the more exciting sports cars for people to rent by the hour. They get the experience without the high price tag. It's kind of like zip cars, but we drop it off or pick them up. I'm not sure about the logistics yet. Still, the whole thing will work like renting a car. But we put this in a community that has a strong middle class to entice people who have the means to rent a car, but not to buy something so expensive. I know they have car clubs in cities, especially in New York City. That's why I want to push this in suburban communities."
"That is a great idea, Colin," Lizbeth said.
"The idea came to me because I wanted to rent something very expensive to take Charlotte out for New Year's, but rental cars are meant to be practical. Mr. Berg is going to help me set it up, finance it, and get it rolling. We have discussed running the Kickstarter campaign and giving donors a certain number of hours or type of car or upgrade."
"That would be a great way to get some early customers, too. Crowdsourcing is very lucrative for these types of projects."
"Charlotte asked Jane to help with the graphic design. She is giving us a very competitive rate, and her work is better than I expected. Considering everything that has gone on this year, I'm shocked she agreed."
"Never underestimate Jane's ability to forgive. How is your mother?"
"Not very well.
I think we didn't really recognize how my father's death affected her."
It appears that my father moderated medications that we had no idea my mother was on. Without him, she stopped taking them once they ran out."
"She has depression and anxiety issues."
"She may be bipolar. The doctors are still trying to get a clearer diagnosis. When she was first being treated years ago, they didn't really talk about these things the same way. We have her in the hospital. The sorority national offices are allowing her health insurance to continue until the end of the year to keep our expenses lower. She said she had taken out the money to keep it safe. She admits she gave some to Jorge and Lydia. Both promised to pay her back. She's still very angry at you for refusing my proposal, and she thought Lydia wanted to marry Jorge. She believes she was helping Lydia and getting back at you. I guess she has always known how wealthy your family is. She might have taken the job at the sorority specifically to play matchmaker for us. She won't say where she went, but when she got Lydia's message, she panicked and ran away. We are still pulling information out of her."
"I'm sorry it all happened, but I am glad she is getting the help she needs, and that the sorority was so supportive. If you are comfortable with it, I think a few of the sisters would like to send cards to her. I can have them sent here, that is, if you and Charlotte don't mind getting them to her."
"I think she would appreciate that. Maybe if she felt less guilt and knew people forgave her,
she would open up a bit more. Also, I want to say personally that I'm very glad you said no when I proposed."
I trusted my mother more than I should have. Charlotte pointed out how we never would have worked, and I realized she was right."
Charlotte came up from the basement. She was dressed in the clothes Lizbeth knew were for painting. The sweatshirt had years of old paint splattered on it.
Her faded black skinny jeans had holes that increased in number and size each time Lizbeth saw them. Charlotte was wiping her hands on an old dish towel and greeted Lizbeth with a hug.
I'm so glad to see you. Come on, let's go outside. We put heat lamps outside so we can enjoy it out there when it's cooler.
Colin went into the kitchen and started making tea. Charlotte led Lizbeth outside.
Colin seems calm, Lizbeth said. Once he was away from his mother, he started changing. The past few months have been tough, and he's taken a lot of the blame on himself, but it has matured him a lot.
Do his siblings place the blame on him?
No, it's self-blame, and I try to help. I think he also worries that he will get sick like her. Guilt is by far his greatest emotion these days. Our relationship has changed too. Wait, tell me about Paris.
Colin brought out the tea, and Lizbeth told them some of the things that had happened in Paris. She focused on the places they went and the things they saw instead of the Caroline drama, at least while Colin sat with them.
Someday I'll take you to Paris, and you will see all these things, Colin told Charlotte when Lizbeth was done.
The three of them sat there in silence, drinking tea.
Lizbeth, I have a further confession to make, Colin said. My mother's behavior to you in the fall was disgraceful. I didn't realize what she had been doing until recently.
It really wasn't that bad, Colin.
No, I don't think you understand. It was more than I already explained. She claimed she knew your mother in college and wanted me to be part of your family. When my father died, she saw an opportunity to make this happen. She was constantly working to make sure we spent time together. It was her idea for me to take Dr. Bennett's class, to ask you to tutor me, and for me to come over for dinner.
Colin, it probably wasn't malicious, Lizbeth said.
No, but it was disgraceful. She was angry that I enjoyed Charlotte's company more than yours. She was angry that I gave up on you so easily after you rejected me. I believe that was when her mental health started breaking down. I know I made the right choice, and it's helped me see things differently, but she isn't able to see her actions clearly yet.
Lizbeth thought about this. Colin, I may not think we could ever be a couple, but you clearly made the right choice for the right reasons. I don't blame you for any harm that your mother may have done. I know she wasn't trying to be malicious or hurtful. You are both forgiven.
Colin smiled and sighed. Some tension left his body. He stood up, kissed the top of Charlotte's head, and went back inside. He has been dealing with that guilt since January. It has caused him a lot of stress. I told him he could say that to you, Charlotte said when Colin was gone.
His mother is very good at hiding things, Lizbeth said.
You have no idea. This may help him focus on his classes again.
He's been struggling to keep up with classes, assignments, and the internship.
Catherine demands a lot of his time, and he has to report back to his professors on what he has been doing with her.
From what you told me, it seems like it is working really well for him. What about your promised internship?
Colin, as it turns out, is my internship in her opinion. I have used it to my advantage and created a ton of paintings. When she complains about the art, he reminds her that this is why I agreed to marry him. The longer we're together, the more he sides with me in conflicts. Even better, sometimes he feels comfortable inserting his own ideas.
You really seem to be bringing out the best in him.
Charlotte's face flushed a little.
What? Lizbeth asked.
He's very different than he was on campus. Mrs. C's crisis has caused him to be self-reflective. He understands why you would never have married him. He won't tell you because he's embarrassed, but he told me his reflections on your gender class presentation last semester, and he thinks he was the very type of douchebag you were talking about.
Lizbeth raised an eyebrow and was impressed that Colin had been able to recognize this about himself.
What about you and Wil?
Charlotte asked, changing the conversation.
Lizbeth sighed. There is nothing between us, even though everyone seems to think there is.
We've heard. I've had accusations hurled at me about it.
By Catherine?
Who else?
My father thought what he saw over the break progressed in a certain direction and spoke before he knew exactly what had happened. He was trying to find a new way to shut her down. I think Catherine said something to Caroline, who accosted me in Paris. What? Lizbeth told Charlotte what she had left out of the earlier story of the Paris adventure.
Can we back up a second?
Charlotte said when she was done. Yeah? You were fantasizing about Will being there with you? Yeah, Lizbeth said with a chuckle. Charlotte laughed with Lizbeth. Who are you and what has happened to Lizbeth? Charlotte asked when she stopped laughing. Things changed over winter break. Obviously, and I'm devastated that I missed it. He was here for a few days earlier in the week. We saw him when we had dinner up at the big house. Has he been here on weekends during the semester? No, not that I know of, at least. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone else? Promise me you won't say anything, but I think I need your advice on it. Okay. Lydia told me he's the one who paid to free her and found Jorge. Charlotte was shocked at the revelation, but Lizbeth felt better having told her. Wow, why? Charlotte said. I'm not sure. He specifically made her promise not to tell me. Why did she? She decided I needed to know because she thought all of us, have misjudged him. But he didn't want you to know. He doesn't want me to think I owe him. I'm not sure if he did this for me or if he just doesn't want me to think he did. Have you talked to him? Lizbeth blushed. No. Everyone here seems to know what happened at Thanksgiving. Lizbeth sighed again. I regret what happened over Thanksgiving. Does he know that? I have no idea, but I thought he had an idea that my feelings have changed.